Hey everyone, Nick Decord here from Kodak Games. In this video, I'm going to go over how to create a grappling hook asset in Unreal Engine 4. This is definitely inspired by the grapple shot from Halo Infinite, and I thought it'd be a lot of fun to try and recreate that mechanic. We'll cover a few different concepts in this video, in this order, and I'll include these either as chapters in the video or as timestamps in the description below, so if there's something in particular you're looking for, feel free to head over there and just jump right to it. So we'll cover parent-child class relationships and blueprints, how to go about firing the hook and changing its behavior based on what it hits. We'll go over how to create an animation montage, using animation notifies to trigger firing the grappling hook, using sockets to attach the grappling hook to the character mesh, and lastly, how to dynamically modify the animation so that our character's arm always follows a certain point in space. That is definitely a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so since we are going to be trying to cover a few different topics in this video, I am going to try and step through it semi-quickly just so that we don't go too long with the video. So if there's anything that I jump over too quickly or don't expand on enough, let me know in the comments below and I can touch on it there, or if it's complicated enough I can actually mark it down as an idea for another video. Before we jump in here, first thing I want to point out is that I am in the first person template here. I just kind of scaled it up a little bit to make it feel a little bit bigger and give me some more room to work around. And then in the project settings, I did add in a couple input actions, one called activate equipment bound to the E key and another called reload level bound to the R key. And I'm just going to be using those throughout this tutorial. And second, in the first person HUD blueprint, I did add in this offset so that way our crosshair will actually line up with a line trace that we're going to be making later. So if it looks different on your screen, it's probably because this offset isn't there. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. So in our grappling hook tutorial folder, we're going to create a new folder called blueprints. And then in that folder, we're going to create another folder, this time called equipment. And in here, we're going to put all our equipment related assets. And now since we're recreating the grapple shot from Halo Infinite, and the idea behind that is that it's just one equipment option out of many, we're actually going to start out by creating a parent blueprint. We're going to choose actor as our base class. We're going to call this BP underscore equipment underscore parent. We'll jump in here real quick. First thing I'm going to do is grab another scene component and call it root and override the scene component that's already in there so we get rid of that sphere. Next, we're going to add in a couple functions. First one is going to be called activate, and the second one is going to be called cancel. And that'll be it for now in here, so we can go ahead and close this out. So we're gonna right click on our equipment parent and create child blueprint class off of that. We're gonna call it BP underscore equipment underscore grappling hook. And in here, we're gonna start actually building our grappling hook. The first thing we're gonna do is add in a couple static mesh components to get the physical, visualization of our grappling hook. First piece we're going to call housing, and then parented off of that we're going to add in another static mesh component. We're going to call this reel, and then we're going to add another static mesh. We're going to call this one hook. Both the reel and hook we want parented to the housing. And compile that real quick. We'll add in these static meshes here. And these are just meshes that I modeled myself, but you can really plug in whatever you want to use here. And we'll zoom in on that real quick, make sure everything pops into place correctly. Grab the reel. And lastly, we will grab the hook. And this will move out here and try and line it up with the barrel. So that I think is close enough. Compile. And we'll go ahead and add in a cable component here to look like the hook is actually attached to the housing. So it's parented, we want it parented to the housing. And then over here under the cable section, under attach end to, we're going to put in hook here. We're going to change this location to 000. And we're going to change the number of segments down to 1. So that way it goes straight from the housing to the hook. We'll zoom in here and we'll drop this width down so that it's a little believable. And we should be done with that. No, we need to go into rendering. We're going to uncheck visible. So that way there's no weird visual artifacts when we're not using our grappling hook. Save that real quick. And now we're going to jump over to our first person character blueprint and actually attach the grappling hook to our character. I already pulled the begin play node way out over here because that's where we're going to be putting this logic. But first we want to go in to our viewport so we can see what we're doing. And we're going to add a scene component. And this is just going to act as kind of like an anchor for our equipment. We'll call that equipment location. And we are going to parent that to the first person character, or first person camera, sorry. Move this out a little bit in front of the camera. And as we test out and debug, we're going to keep our equipment there so that way we get a clear view of what's going on. We'll go ahead and grab a spawn actor from class node. For the class, we'll choose our grappling hook. And for the transform, we're going to grab that equipment location component and we're going to say get world transform. Yes. And we'll plug that into that pin there. Connect that to that. Now we're going to create a variable. We're going to call this equipment reference. It's going to be in a reference to whatever equipment we have socketed. And we're going to change that type to equipment. Equipment parent object reference. So now after we spawn it, we're going to go ahead and attach this actor to the component that we just created. So we're going to grab our equipment location component and plug it in as the parent. And for these options here, we're going to choose snap to target. So now we're going to grab our equipment reference variable. We're going to set that to the grappling hook that we just spawned. And we'll go ahead and connect all this together. Now we'll compile this and we'll test it out real quick. And there's our grappling hook and it's following us around. So now we're going to drop down here. This is where I use the reload level input. And I just use it to call this open level node and just reloads the map that we're in. So let's go ahead and grab that activate equipment input action. And we're going to use this to talk to our equipment and activate it. So now that we have this set up, we're going to jump back over to our grappling hook and actually do something with that activate function. So in our event graph, we can go ahead and grab all that and delete it since we don't need it. And we're going to jump over to our functions window here and override this activate function. So now in here, the first thing that we want to do is do a line trace to see if there's anything for our grappling hook to actually, connect to. And for this, we're actually going to use a reference to the first person camera in our first person character. So for that, we're going to create another variable. We're going to call it FP character reference. We're going to change the type to first person character object reference. So now for that, we're going to pull this out here, do a get, and we're going to right click and convert this to a validated get. So now if it's not valid, we actually want to go ahead and set it. So we'll get our player character. We'll cast this to a first person character. Connect that to the is not valid. And we'll use that output to set our variable. And then we can connect this to this and that to that. Now over here, we're going to use our first person character reference to get the first person camera. And with that, we're going to get its world location, as well as its forward vector. We're going to use both of those to create both a start and end point. We'll get a vector plus a vector node, and we'll do a vector times a float here. We'll plug in 50 here to offset it a little bit from the front of the camera, and add that to its location, and use that as a start point. And we'll do this again down here. Plug this into the top, and this into this one. And this time we'll do 3500 and use that as the endpoint. Clean this up a little. We'll change the draw debug type to for duration, change the duration to 3. And we'll use this return value here to control a branch. Off the true branch, we'll do a print string. We'll have it say hit. And off the false, we'll do another print string. Have it say no hit. We'll compile that and we'll test it real quick. So there's a hit, and there's a hit, no hit, no hit, 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 perfect. So now that we've verified that's working, we'll delete that, and we'll actually grab all of these nodes here, right click and collapse it to a function. And we'll just call it check for object in range. So now we actually want to fire our hook at whatever we hit and attach it to it. So for that, we actually need to go in here and we're going to add an output to this function. We'll go over here and click the new parameter. We'll just call it hit result and change the type to hit result. And we'll grab this pin here and connect those two together. We'll jump back over to our activate function. And with this, we're going to go ahead and break the hit result. Now the two main things that we want out of here are the location and the other actor that we've hit. So for our location, I'm going to promote that to a local variable because I only need it in this function. However, for the other actor, I'm going to promote that to a global variable since we'll be using that elsewhere. And we're just going to call that grappled object. And we can collapse this down now that we got what we need. And off the true branch, we're going to set these because we only want to set these variables if we actually hit something. So now that we have those two, we can go ahead and grab our hook. And we're going to set its world location to whatever the hit location is from our hit. And then next, we're going to grab our hook again. And we're going to attach component to component. This time the other component is going to be the root component of our grappled object. We'll parent those together, and for these rules here, we're going to do keep world for all of these. And we'll connect this together and connect this together. And clean this up a tiny bit. And next, we actually want to get our cable component. And we want to set the visibility to true. We can actually see it now. We'll compile that and test it. And it seems to be working. We'll do something similar again here. We're going to take all this and we'll collapse it to a function and call it fire hook. Alright, so now that we have all that in place, we want to start actually adding the functionality in for moving our character using the grappling hook. So there's a few different ways to do this. This is just the way I chose to do it. In our equipment folder, I'm going to add something called an enumerator, which is under the blueprints category. And I'm going to call this grappling hook operating modes. We'll jump in here. We're going to add a few different options. First one, well, we'll add 3 different options. And the first one is going to be inactive. The second one we'll call pulling player. And the third one we'll call pulling object. And these are basically the 3 different modes that we want to switch between. Now we can close that out, and then back in our grappling hook, we're going to go over to our event graph. We're going to pull in the event tick function. And off of this, we're going to do a switch on grappling hook operating modes. On there you go. And then lastly, we're going to promote this input to a variable and call it operating mode. So now in our activate function, at the very end here, for now, we're just going to get our operating mode and set it to pulling player. And we'll start building that functionality. Oh, I see. So we actually need to add an input here. Let's call it hit location. Change the type to vector. And then in our activate function, we'll go ahead and get the hit location and connect that. We'll try that. Perfect. So now we'll go back to our event graph here, and we're gonna go ahead and get our first person character. From that, we're going to get our first person camera, and we're going to get its world location. Next, we're going to get our hook, and we're going to get its world location as well. So now using those two locations, we are going to get a unit direction as a vector from the camera to the hook. And we're going to multiply this by a float. We're going to promote this float here to a variable, and we're going to call it grapple speed. We'll compile, and we'll set the default value of this to 1500. Now that we have that, we're going to get our first person character again, and we're going to leverage the movement component that it has by default. Using this, we're going to set its velocity to the velocity that we just calculated. And we'll connect that to our pulling player node here. Let's test that out. So it works going flat, but it does not pull us up into the air. So for that, we need to go back into our activate. After we set the operating mode to pulling player, we're actually going to tell our character to jump. And that will actually let us override the vertical portion of the velocity instead of keeping the character stuck to the ground. And now it's working mostly how we want it to. We'll go ahead and get all this. We'll collapse this to a function again. Call it pull player. And move it up a little bit out of the way. And compile. So now we can start differentiating between when we want to pull the player and when we want to pull the object that we're grappled to. So to do that, we're actually going to use actor tags. And to make sure that you can actually see what I'm doing, let me hide my camera. So we're going to go ahead and grab these boxes here in the cubes folder. We're going to mass select all of these, and then in the details panel here, I'm going to search for tags. And under this actor tags category, we'll add a new one, and we'll call it can be grappled. So now that we have actors with this tag, let me bring myself back. And we can go into our grappling hook, and in the activate function, after we fire the hook, we can do a branch. And this is going to be controlled by whether or not our actor has a tag. So the actor in question is going to be our grappled object. And the tag is going to be the one we just made, called can be grappled. So now if it does have that, we actually want to pull the object. So we're going to switch this over to false and pull this down out of the way. And now we're going to get our operating mode and set it, if it's true, to pulling object. So we can go back to our event graph here and the tick. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get our hook location, and get the housing location. And we're going to create a unit vector from that. We're going to get unit direction from the hook to the housing. We're going to multiply that by our grapple speed. And now we're going to actually multiply this again, but this time by the delta seconds value from our tick event. We'll go ahead and drag that all the way over here. Now with that, what we're going to do is get our grappled object. And we're going to do add actor world offset. And the offset that we're going to use is what we just calculated. So from this pulling object branch here, we're going to connect that together. And now we can go ahead and test it out. And it seems to be working. It's pulling objects towards us, and it pulls us to the end. If we hit something that doesn't have the tag. Perfect. So once again, we'll go ahead and grab all of this and collapse it to a function. And we'll call this pool object. You can drag it up here, and we'll go ahead and rename that input pin here. Instead of it just being called B, we'll call it delta T. And compile. So now we can start using our cancel function to actually reset the hook so we can use it more than once. So in our functions window again, we're going to override and drop down to cancel. And we're going to add a new component. This time it's going to be a sphere collision component. And we're going to call this hook cancel trigger because it's parented. It's going to be parented to our hook, and it's going to trigger our cancel function. So we can go back to our event graph, and we can click on our hook cancel trigger, scroll down to the event list here, and click on component begin overlap. So now with this, what we want to do is we want to check if our other actor, the actor that this is overlapped with, is equal to what we have stored in our character reference. And we're going to grab a branch from that and connect those two together. And if it's true, then we'll call that cancel function. Compile that. And now we want our cancel function to actually do something. So we'll jump into that. And the first thing that we want to do is set our operating mode back to inactive. And then we will reattach the hook to the housing. So we'll get an attached component to component, connect that, and get our housing and use that as the parent. For each of these rules, we're going to choose snap to target. And then next, we're going to go ahead and set the relative location of our hook to whatever it is currently, whatever the default position is. So in our viewport, I'm going to click on this, see what it's at. I'm going to make these some cleaner numbers, so I'll change that to 12, 0, and 0.25. Compile. And back in our cancel function, I'll put those numbers in here. And lastly, we want to set our cable back to invisible. So we'll set the new visibility to false. We'll compile that and test it. And it seems to be working. So now that we have that working the way that we want, the last thing I want to add in here is adding rotation to the reel whenever the grappling hook is being used. We won't be able to see it very well at the moment, but once we attach it to our character, it'll be more visible. So to do that, we're going to add a component. We're going to call in a rotating movement component, and I'll just call that reel rotator. I want the default rotation rate to be 0 on all axes, so that way it's not rotating unless we tell it to. In our event graph, I'm actually going to pull back in the begin play node. And on begin play, I'm going to get our reel rotator. I'm going to set the updated component to the reel. So that way when we tell it to rotate, it rotates just the reel component instead of the entire grappling hook. Compile that. And back in our activate function, where do we want to put this? I think after we fire the hook. So we'll go ahead and grab all of this and push it to the right. In here we'll get our reel rotator and we'll set the rotation rate to something like 720 on the z-axis, and we'll plug this in here. So now when we fire our hook, it will start to rotate the reel. And then in our cancel function, we want to go ahead and get our reel rotator here and set that rotation rate back to 0 so it stops rotating. And then we also want to get our reel and set the relative rotation back to 0 so that way it looks like it's back in its starting position. So that'll become more obvious once we get into animations and things like that and actually attach it to the character, which we're actually going to start doing now. So we'll jump back over into our content browser and we are going to go to our first person folder under animations, and we're going to start using an animation montage. I'm going to be using a few animation sequences that you can see here to make our montage, just a couple rough animations that I put together. So under animation, we're going to find animation montage. We're going to use the arm skeleton because that's what our first person character uses. And we're going to call this montage underscore use equipment. We'll jump in here. We'll start building this out. For you to see this, I think I need to hide again. So there we go. Under asset browser, we want to go ahead and pull in our animations that we'll use here. We'll start with the forward start, and then we'll grab the idle and the end. So now we're going to start making some sections here. First one will be start. The middle one will be idle. And the last one will be end. And we can go ahead and delete this section now. So our start will actually be at the start. And I think now I can come back. So we'll go ahead and line up these sections with the ends and beginnings of our animations. And now if we preview that, you'll see it goes from the start through the idle to the end. Which isn't necessarily what we want because we don't know how long we need to stay in our idle. We want that to loop. So I lied, actually, I need to hide again. Because to control all of that is down here in the bottom right. And this is kind of all the relationships here. So after idle, we want to click this drop down and choose idle again. And that tells it to loop through the idle animation until we tell it to stop. So if we preview that again, you'll see it just loops through that idle animation. One more thing that we need to add here are a couple of notifies. I'm going to add a new notify here. I'm going to call this started using equipment. And we'll add another one over here and call it stopped using equipment. And these are the notifies that we're going to use to actually trigger our grappling hook firing and changing our animations. So this notify I'm going to put somewhere around like frame 10. This one I want right at the beginning of the end section. So we'll save this. And from there, I think we can actually jump into our first person animation blueprint. So we're going to go to our event graph. And down here, we're going to go ahead and under add anim notify event, we're going to grab started using equipment and stopped using equipment. So now what we want to do is set it up so that when we get to that point in our montage, that's what fires the grappling hook. So to do that, under started using equipment, we're going to try get pawn owner. We're going to copy what's up here using is valid node. And if it is valid, what we're going to do is use our pawn owner we're going to cast it to a first-person character. And as a first-person character, we're going to get our equipment reference. And using that, we're going to call our activate function. We'll compile that, make sure it works. And in our first-person character blueprint, instead of calling the activate function here, we are actually going to tell it to play that montage when we hit our activate equipment key. So we'll choose the use equipment montage there, and starting section we can leave to none because we want it to start at the start by default. So let's go ahead and test that out. And nothing happens. And that is because we forgot to put our skeletal mesh into the in skeletal mesh component bin. We'll compile that and try it again. So it doesn't play the animation, but it does fire. So let's jump over to our animation blueprint, see what's going on there. And I think it has something to do with this arm slot here. So we'll jump into our montage and we'll change this slot here to default group.arms. And we'll go ahead and switch that out real quick, let it refresh. And we'll save this and save this. And we'll try this again. There we go. So now when we get to the right point in the animation, it fires the grappling hook. However, now we need that animation to end when we cancel our grappling hook. So we'll go into here, and in our cancel function, we unfortunately cannot play montages even if you look for it with context sensitive unchecked. So we actually need to do that in our event graph. We'll go down here and add custom event. We'll call it on cancel or when canceled, something along those lines. And from this, we can play the montage. We will use our first person character reference to get the correct skeletal mesh and plug that into the in skeletal mesh. Change the montage to use equipment. And this time we want the starting section to be the end. We'll compile that, jump into the cancel function, and at the very end here, we'll call on cancel. And now we'll test that out. And there we go. Seems to be working. So now we can go ahead and actually attach the grappling hook to our character. And to do that, we want to go to our character skeleton, find the bone lower arm left, right click and add socket. We'll click on it again to refresh it, and we will call it equipment socket. And use correct capitalization. We'll double click and copy that, we'll need it later. And now we'll go ahead and focus in on that. And what we want to do here now is drag this out and up, because this is going to be the actual location where our grappling hook sits. And I think that will work. So we'll go ahead and save that. And back in our first person character blueprint, we're going to go back up to this begin play logic we set up earlier. And instead of connecting it to this equipment location component, we're actually going to connect it to that socket instead. So we'll get the socket transform of the equipment socket and plug that in there. And then we will actually attach it to that socket as well. We'll use the mesh as the parent and the socket name in the socket name. We'll go ahead and test that out. And there it is. But we're getting some weird stuff there. And it turns out that is because we had the wrong collision settings on our grappling hook. We actually want to go over here to the housing reel and hook. And instead of block all dynamic, we're going to set that to ignore only pawn. So now it'll react with everything else except for our pawn mesh. So we'll go ahead and try that out again. And there we go. Seems to be working okay, and we're able to move around all right. Now, as you may have noticed, whenever we're playing with this, our arm looks just straight ahead instead of where the grappling hook is actually attached to. So we'll go ahead and fix that next. To do that, we're going to go into our animation blueprint. And this time in our animation graph, we are going to get I believe it's called look at node. Yeah. We're going to click on that. And the bone to modify, we're going to choose lower arm left again. And we're going to set our axis to 1 on the x-axis. And for the look at location, we're going to change this to expose as pin. So now we can plug in any location that we want here. We'll create a new variable, call it bone look at location, and change it to a vector. And we'll get that and plug it in here. So now how we're going to set this is through our grappling hook. What we want to do is in our event graph. In here, what we're going to do is find our event tick function again. And we are going to create a new variable. We're going to call it fp anim blueprint. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing that we did before, where we do a validated get. Convert to validated get, there we go. And plug that in here. So if it's not valid, we're going to take our character reference, and we're going to get anim instance from mesh2p. Clean this up. We will cast this to a first person animation blueprint and plug that into the is not valid. From there, we will go ahead and set our reference or our variable. Oh, I didn't change the type. We need to change this type to first person anim VP object reference. We'll go ahead and change the variable type and plug that in. So now that we have our animation blueprint reference, we can go ahead and pull that in. We'll get that, and we'll set the bone look at location. Connect this and this. And for the location, we actually want to get our hook's location. And we'll plug that in here. So definitely want to clean this up a little bit. I think I'll drag this down here and this down here. So now we should have a way to plug in that variable. Let's see. And the problem there is I think we did not compile our animation blueprint. So we'll try this again here. And there we go. So now we can go back to our animation blueprint. And we need a way of telling our animation blueprint to switch between its regular pose and this modified pose. So for that, we're going to pull in a blend poses by boolean, which means we need to create a new variable for this. And we'll just call it is using equipment. And to control this, we'll jump back over to our event graph. And in these two events here, we'll set it whenever these events are triggered. So on the started using equipment, we want that to be true. And on the stopped using equipment, we want it to be false. So we'll compile that. And now we can go ahead and if it's true, it means we are using equipment. That means we want to modify the bone. So we'll plug that in there. However, if it's false, we want it to do this normal animation data. We can't plug this output into both this input and that input. So instead, we're going to do a new save cached pose. We're going to change this name to just locomotion. And now down here, we can use that locomotion cache. And we can plug it in here. And then we can plug it into the false pose as well. So if we're not using equipment, just do the normal thing. Plug that in as our output pose, compile, and test. And it seems to be working. So now our arm is following wherever we are grappling to. So that does it for the main functionality, but there is one more thing that I want to add just kind of for fun. So we'll go back to our map here, and I migrated in the third-person blueprint from the third-person reference or third-person template. So I'm going to pull this guy in, put him in front of the character there, rotate him around so that he's kind of looking at the character. And what we're going to do with this guy is we're going to add a couple tags here. So make sure that you can see it. So we'll search for tags, and you can't unless I hide, so there we go. We'll add a couple tags in here. The first one is going to be that can be grappled tag, just so that we can actually grapple him. And there you go. And the second one is just going to be an enemy tag. So now we have another way of kind of adding some functionality in there. So we'll go back into our grappling hook, and I'll bring myself back in here. And we'll go to our activate function. And this time, if we do have the can be grapple tag, we're going to do another actor has tag node, or another actor has tag check. This time we're going to check for that enemy tag. And we'll add a branch off of that. And this is where we want to do something if it's true. However, we need something to actually do. So let me pull up the third-person character blueprint. And we're going to add a couple custom events in here. The first one we're going to call on start being grappled. And the second one is going to be called on stop being grappled. Now when we start being grappled, what I want the third person character to do is set its rotation to be looking at the player. So to do that, we are going to get the player character's rotation or location. We'll grab that and get world location. Get, I think we need actor world location. Get actor location. Okay, there we go. And then next we want to get the actor location of ourselves, of the third person blueprint. So now we can do something called look at rotation. And the start is going to be the third person character and the target is our player character. So now we can set the actor rotation to whatever that rotation is. We'll plug that in, compile, and test. It did not work because we did not actually call this event. So we'll go back into our grappling hook, and off of this branch here, we're going to pull in our grappled object. We're going to cast it to a third-person character. And as a third-person character, we'll call that event on start being grappled. And now we want to go into our cancel function. I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to copy this because we're going to use all of this again. And in our cancel function, we can pull that in here. And we'll check again if our actor has that tag. Except this time, instead of on start being grappled, we'll call on stop being grappled. So let's try that out. And there you go. Now he looks at you, all menacingly. So in our third person characters, a couple other things I want to add in here. Something that I think is fun is making him ragdoll. So what we want to do is get a set all bodies below simulate physics for our mesh. Make sure we're getting the right one there. And we'll set the simulate to true and uncheck self. We'll promote this to a variable so that we can set whatever bone name we want. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the pelvis bone because I want everything except for the root and the pelvis to actually simulate physics. And you can actually go in and see the tree by going to third person, or no, under mannequin, I think. Animations, no, character. Mesh, and then the skeleton here. So now if we grab pelvis, everything underneath the pelvis will start to simulate physics. So we'll go ahead and click this in there, drag this down, and now let's see what happens. And there you go. However, he does not stop simulating physics. So we'll grab this, and down here, we'll go ahead and set that simulate back to false. And there you go. But now that's a little crazy. So instead of this simulate physics, this just like straight switch, we're actually going to call in a timeline to smooth that out for us. And we'll call this Grapple effect. We're going to go in here, add a float track, and call this physics blend weight, which I'll explain in a sec. We're going to change the length to just something like 0.3 seconds. We'll add in a couple keys. This first one we'll set to 0 and 0. This one we'll set to the end and 1. We'll fit that in there and compile. I'm going to right click and choose auto for both of these and save. Now back in here, after we simulate physics, we'll play this from the start, and we're going to set all bodies below physics blend weight. And we're going to use the same bone name here. And this float track is actually going to set that blend weight. So we'll update that every tick in that timeline. And we'll play that from the start for when we start being grappled. However, instead of all of this, for our on stop being grappled, what we can do is just plug this into the reverse from end. So it'll just play that in reverse. Let's see how that looks. So it's a little bit smoother, still a little crazy, but smoother. Alright, so now we have a mostly working grappling hook. One bug I did notice is that if we don't have a hit, we get this weird animation bug here, and we want to go ahead and fix that real quick. So in our grappling hook blueprint, in the activate function, off of the first branch that we had in here, if there is no hit, what we want to do is just go ahead and call that on cancel function, or the on cancel event. So now, if it does call that, it'll play that end montage and go back to normal. So let's test that out. And there we go. Perfect. So now with that, I believe we have a fully working grappling hook. You know, we can pull ourselves wherever we want and fly to it. We can pull things to us, and we can even pull enemies towards us and make them freak out. And with that, we now have a working grappling hook asset in Unreal Engine. Thank you so much for watching. This video definitely got a little bit longer than I intended it to, but if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, and ring the bell. That'll really help me grow the channel. Also, I do have Instagram and Twitter accounts where I post more updates on the videos that I'm working on, so if you'd like to follow me there, I'll leave links to those in the description below. And lastly, if you'd like to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon where you can sign up for early access to videos and links to download the project files for my tutorials. I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.